Scotland's highest court has granted permission for campaigners to seek a judicial review of Donald Trump's unexplained wealth amid ongoing calls to scrutinize how the former president was able to purchase 2 golf resorts in the country. Trump had spent more than $300 million in buying and developing the resorts. The petition argued that there are no reasonable grounds to suspect that known sources of lawfully obtained income would have been sufficient to pay for Trump's acquisition of the golf courses. I made a video about that part, but it's going further today. The move was granted by Lord Sandison of the Court of Session in Scotland, ruling that there was a sensible legal argument to be had on the matters raised by the petition, and he grants permission for the petition to proceed without condition or restriction. But what could happen to Trump? To answer that, we need to know a little about those so-called McMafia orders. So what is a McMafia order? A McMafia order is a court order issued against someone relating to certain property. The order requires them to explain their interest in that property, how they obtained it, and any other information relating to that property which is included in the court order. The respondent to the order has a fixed period of time as decided by the court granting the order to respond. Depending on what is requested in the order, the response might require written answers, the production of documents, or any other evidence. The order must relate to property which has a value of at least £50,000. Well, 300 million is enough, I guess. So there's interim freezing orders there. When applying to the court for a McMafia order, the relevant enforcement authority might also apply at the same time for an interim freezing order. The freezing order would prohibit the person receiving the McMafia order and any other person with an interest in that property, let's think about Trump's son, from dealing with the property, for example, selling it. If there was no freezing order, then a person receiving the McMafia order who knew they wouldn't be able to comply might, for example, sell the property and make off with the money. This, of course, would undermine the whole point of the McMafia order. It therefore seems likely that most applications for a McMafia order will be accompanied by one for an interim freezing order. I haven't heard about if that already happened to Trump. But what happens if they fail to comply with it, as Trump usually does? If the recipient responds in a way that attempts to comply with the order's requirement, the enforcement authority may then consider what steps, if any, it wants to take in relation to the property. If there is an interim freezing order in place, any decision to take steps must be made within 60 days of the date of compliance with the order. 48 hours after the 60-day period ends, the respondent can apply to have the interim freezing order lifted. If the recipient of a McMafia order fails to respond without reasonable excuse, the property is presumed to be recoverable property for the purposes of any civil recovery order sought. This means a claim can be made to the court to confiscate the property on the basis that it constitutes the proceeds of crime. The court will presume that the property is the proceeds of unlawful conduct and therefore make an order that it be confiscated unless the respondent can satisfy the court that on the balance of probabilities, that means more likely than not, that it is not. Importantly, therefore, a McMafia order is an investigative tool. It is intended to make it easier to obtain a CRO by reversing the burden of proof. It doesn't in itself grant law enforcement authorities any new powers to confiscate assets. But Trump is able to commit a criminal offense here. False statements, for example, generally statements made in response to a McMafia order cannot be used as evidence in any criminal prosecution. Though it's problematic. The explanatory notes don't explain why this is the case, but it's likely to be because the respondent to a McMafia order is effectively being compelled to respond or face the risk of losing their property, and doesn't have the right to remain silent, which they would have in a criminal prosecution. There are a small number of exceptions. One is if a person knowingly or recklessly responds to a McMafia order in a false or misleading way, which is a crime that is punishable by up to 2 years in prison. Another is that the response to the McMafia order can be used in evidence if a person is being prosecuted for a separate crime and makes statements inconsistent with what they've said in the McMafia order. This can only happen if that person brings up the statement themselves by putting forward evidence or asking questions about this statement they made in the McMafia order response, so the attorney can't do that. It is a very interesting piece, and if Trump doesn't answer or answers very reluctantly, he has to face, in the worst case, confiscating of both golf courses. I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.